So when coming to Da Vinci's Demons, where did the inspiration actually come from to make this series?
I was approached by Jane Tranter and Julie Gardner, who are at Adjacent Productions. They came out of BBC, and they wanted to do something, a sort of European-American co-production. They wanted to do something that was historically based, because that tends to do well around the world. And they specifically sought me out and said, would you ever do anything historical? And I said, well, I hadn't. And I don't know if I'm the guy to do like the straight, docudrama. And they said, no, I remember they said, we want the Batman Begins version of history. So we talked about his...
Wait, is that what they literally said?
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. And we talked about different historical figures, Genghis Khan, Cleopatra, Da Vinci, and then I just thought, wow, nobody's done, that's kind of crazy. No one's even done, I mean, he's been sort of a supporting figure in various comic books and films and things like that, but given all the stuff he was involved in, it's kind of crazy that no one's done a show or a movie about him. So I said, okay, I'll take a whack at him, and I knew a fair amount about him, but the more I researched, the more I thought, wow, this actually could be an awesome show. So I pitched what the show effectively is, which is completely insane. It's kind of the Grant Morrison version of Da Vinci, and they went for it. So,
and you're actually the writer, producer, creator, director of 2 episodes. I mean, is that a bit overwhelming, or do you actually love being in control of the entire?
It's fun. It's tiring. I mean, I on the way here, I was working with our composer Bear McCreary. Giving him notes, and then also giving notes on some visual effects shots, and it can be overwhelming, but it's fun. And the show, we had a great time doing it, and this isn't always true, but I really love the cast and the crew. So it's even though it's in Wales, which is a pain to commute to, it's nice when you do something that you're proud of and you like the people that you're making it with.
And what would you kind of classify this this show? Because it's historical, but there's some sort of fantasy involved in it as well.
I'm calling it historical fantasy, adventure fantasy. It's kind of swashbuckling. I mean, oddly enough, I love Game of Thrones. It's not as grim as Game of Thrones. There aren't a lot of shows like it right now. It's kind of an adventure show, so I felt like it's also just fun, I think.
And actually, we have you have Leonardo da Vinci as a 25-year-old. How much of that was he's like an inventor, a swordsman, an intellect, I guess. How much of that was left to creative freedom, and how much of it is actually historical fact?
A shocking amount of it was historical fact. I mean, he was known to be a really good swordsman. He was ambidextrous, so he could fight with both his left and his right hand. He was known to be a very good rider. He was supposedly around 6 feet tall. He was very good looking. He was very strong. Some people say he was gay, but then there are various other people that say he had fathered a host of illegitimate children, and that the Duchess of Milan was, one of his girlfriends, and all sorts of things like that. He did invent diving suit and the submarine and the machine gun and the tank and the bicycle and supposedly a humanoid robot and a life-size lion robot and all sorts of things like that. He did work as a war engineer. He worked for Borgia and the Duke of Milan. I mean, that's all true. So,
I mean, in doing the research of Da Vinci, did you kind of find, was there a particular piece of information that you found that was something that you really didn't know that stuck out?
Well, I was fascinated. One of the reasons why we decided to set the show when we did is there's a 4-year gap where very little is known. That, if we're lucky enough, we'll get into more in the 2nd season. But supposedly, he worked for the Ottoman Empire and was in Syria and Egypt as a war engineer. And he wrote 2 letters claiming that's what he'd been doing. But nobody knows. He just there's a fair amount of information about him when our show begins, and then he kind of vanishes for a while and shows up again in Milan, I think in 1482 or something like that.
And nobody really knows where
exactly
what he's
and when
really
you're
doing.
Dealing with a historical figure, those gaps are kind of gold because it allows you the latitude to invent.
And what I actually found really interesting about Da Vinci is that, you know, he's known as to be a remarkable artist, but there aren't really that many paintings
No.
of such.
There's like 19,
Yeah.
22, something like that. And people don't really know why. I mean, one of the things is I don't. Da Vinci was an incredible artist, but I don't think he wanted to be remembered as an artist. I think he wanted to be remembered as an inventor, as a scientist. But because he was a bastard, he wasn't allowed to inherit wealth. He wasn't allowed to inherit land. And so one of his only entrees into kind of society was through his art. And you can see in his writing, I think that was very calculated. He would use art as a way to gain patronage with these famous people. And then once he had an audience with them, he'd try to bend their ear and say, hey, I've got this idea for a machine gun,
Yeah.
or this or that. And,
Yeah.
and that was his kind of entree into the world. He also was really famous for starting lots of pieces of art and never finishing them. And I get the sense that he just got bored, and he's one of those, like a lot of polymaths, he would come up with the idea, and then once he had the idea, he was too poor to actually execute it. And I think that's fascinating.
So in the first episode, you actually use that boredom aspect of him saying, "Oh, I get bored." I mean, is that something just coming from you, or is that something that you actually?
No, I think that he really
Yeah.
was like that.
Yeah.
He writes about it, and I think he was, if there are a lot of accounts of him, he sounds like he was kind of infuriating to be around because he was incredibly bright, but he had a big mouth, and he was super arrogant, and Michelangelo hated him because he was a very flamboyant dresser, and the two of them actually physically came to blows, a number of times, which I find fascinating as well.
Is there any plan for us to see that in the series?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah. Oh.
absolutely. We even see he also had a bit of a feud going on with Botticelli. He thought Botticelli's perspectives and his backgrounds were inadequate, but if the show keeps going, we'll absolutely see Michelangelo, who just sounds like a total dick to me. Michelangelo.
No, one part of the storyline that I actually enjoy is that you kind of go into the metaphysical kind of world,
Yes.
Insinuating that Leonardo is involved in a brotherhood, fraternity, and there's like
A brotherhood that existed.
So is it actually true that he was involved in all this?
We
or
don't know. He certainly would have been aware of the Sons of Mithras, because purportedly Plato and Aristotle and Socrates were members of the Sons of Mithras, and these Mithraeums, which are the sort of places of worship, they're all over Europe, and there are a ton of them, specifically in Italy. And he absolutely would have found these Mithraeums in caves, and a lot of churches were sort of, the foundations were built atop these Mithraeums. So he absolutely would have been aware of them. We don't completely know what the Sons of Mithras were about because they were a purely oral tradition. So all that we have left of them is some of their art, some of the statuary, things like that, and the fact that they were a secret society. But, the Book of Leaves, which is what Da Vinci is questing for, is kind of the grand MacGuffin of the show, the Grail.
Mm-hmm.
There's an Indiana Jones-like aspect to the show as well.
Now, Da Vinci's thinking has kind of been compared closely to divine, I guess, coming from God. Where do you think he kind of went to tap into this kind of source? Because he seems like he was able to kind of tap into some sort of source and just create.
I don't know, it's interesting. I mean, early on in his life, he doesn't seem to have been particularly religious, and he's actually somewhat dismissive of religion. At the end of his life, he asked to take confession, and I guess a lot of people become believers on their deathbeds, right? I don't know. I mean, if you think about how many things he invented and how many mediums he mastered, I'm really hard-pressed to think of anyone else in the history of mankind that was as much of a genius as he was. I mean, if you think about Einstein or Oppenheimer or people like that, they were absolutely geniuses. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates.
Yeah.
But they didn't master 40 different things.
Yeah.
Everything that Da Vinci did, he was the best at. He was an incredible musician. People say that his anatomy drawings, because he dissected corpses, that if more of those had been known, he would have been known as the greatest anatomist of his day. That his anatomy drawings are so accurate they're as accurate as some modern day MRIs, people have said. So, as a scientist, it just kind of goes on and on.
Now, Da Vinci's workshop that you have in the show is, in my opinion, kind of like his Batcave. You know, it's like it has like his little toys, his little trinkets. How much of all that was left to your kind of creative freedom, and how much of it was actually?
Well, there aren't any photographs of his various workshops, but there are secondhand accounts, and they did apparently were these sort of wonderlands that were cluttered and filled with things, and he was always working on 40 different things at one time. And the truth is, they were probably more amazing than what we constructed, because we probably couldn't afford to construct, what he did. But it sounds like Da Vinci's workshop was a pretty amazing place, from what we know.
And the little trinkets and the little mechanics that are in the show, those are actually fact, right? Are those actually from Da Vinci?
Most of those, yes.
Yeah.
When he died, he had purportedly 13,000 pages of his manuscript, and we only have a little over 6,000 of them. So somewhere between his death and now, 7,000 went missing. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the machines and whatnot that he invented, they do show up in the show, but those only exist in the 6,000 pages, and I think it's reasonable to assume that the other 7,000 pages had other devices. Mm-hmm. So eventually, we will introduce some other devices and theorize that Da Vinci may have invented them or been aware of them, things like that. But certainly the devices that he did invent will probably get us through the first 3 seasons.
So it's planned for 3 seasons, is that?
Oh no! Hopefully it'll go more. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
We've got enough inventions that it could probably get us through three seasons worth, and then we'd have to start coming up with some other ones.
Now, is it true that The Empire Strikes Back kind of has some sort of influence into the design of the Vatican for this?
The whole I constantly use Star Wars as a point of reference for the show, because I said, yes, it's historical fantasy, but the tropes are absolutely sort of Joseph Campbell, hero's journey, hero with 1,000 faces, which is all Star Wars. And I would often, as a shorthand for Starz and the BBC, say, well, think of this character like the Emperor, and think of this character like Darth Vader, and think of this character, the Turk, as Obi-Wan, and it was easier for them to get it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the Vatican, I said, because we're dealing with like the secret archives and things like that, there are places that sets and locations in the show that are historically accurate, and there are others that I said I don't care. Mm. And so the secret archives is like the Death Star. It just the stacks of the secret archives literally in our show go on beneath Rome for miles and miles and miles and miles, and go down like 20 stories. I mean, it's something that could never exist.
Yeah.
But that's the fun part of it.
And if this show actually does well, I mean, it's eight episodes for season 1. I mean, you guys go to season 2, do you guys plan to expand the episodes, or do you want to keep it to like a short?
The subsequent seasons would be 10 apiece, probably. Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to ask you. I actually heard that you're adapted to play or direct Count of Monte Cristo.
Yes.
Is that your first adaptation, or when it comes to directing, or?
Yes.
Is that kind of have you started working on it, or is it just?
I didn't write it.
Yeah.
It's funny because it came to me while I was shooting Da Vinci, and it's Da Vinci-esque. There were a lot of similarities. I sent them, when I showed them Da Vinci's Demons. It's a kind of postmodern take on the Count of Monte Cristo, and when they offered it to me, but then when they saw Da Vinci's Demons, they said, "Oh, you really are the right guy," because they share a lot in common. So
is it going to be a different take, or different adaptation from others that we've seen then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a reworking.
Okay. And is there any truth that you're going to be writing the new Justice League film?
I can't possibly comment on that.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Nice meeting you.